The following program features the opinions of the host. Listeners are encouraged to seek their own understanding.
Horses are magnificent and beautiful creatures, and in the Bible they have an important place. For the Israelites, these were mainly work animals. For Yahweh, this is the animal that Christ will return upon to defeat his enemies. 4 horses, and the creatures that ride them figure heavily into the prophetic images and statements made in the book of Revelation. We know them commonly as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Who exactly are these entities, and what do they mean for mankind? Welcome to the Ghost in You podcast, a podcast about the weird, the wonderful, and the terrifying in the Bible. I'm Diane Student, your guide and host on this strange journey through the Bible. Episode 16, 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have been a part of popular culture for centuries. They've been the subject of hundreds of pieces of art. Albrecht Dürer's piece is on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is a woodcut dating to 1498. Russian painter Viktor Vasnetsov created his painting on the subject in 1887. And they've shown up in movies and TV shows, as recently as Melissa McCarthy's God's Favorite Idiot on Netflix in 2022. Clint Eastwood's film Pale Rider was inspired by the 4th horseman, Death. The first film featuring them was a silent movie in 1921. They are something we are all familiar with, and entities that many may fear. Revelation 6 features the opening of the 7 seals during the tribulation. As the first 4 seals are opened, 4 terrifying riders come forward. Revelation 6 verses 1-8 reads, "Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, 'Come.' And I looked, and behold, a white horse. And its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, 'Come.' And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, 'Come.' And I looked, and behold, a black horse. And its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, 'A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine.' When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, 'Come.' And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth." I want to point out quickly that the 4th horse is followed by Hades. We don't know if this is a possible 5th rider on an undescribed horse, or if it is on the same horse as Death, or maybe even walking behind Death. Many people are familiar with the descriptive words used for the 4 horsemen: conquest, war, famine, and death, but not many know who these riders might be specifically. The Bible's not clear on the specifics, but there are enough clues that we can venture some guesses. And when we look at other hints in various cultures through the centuries, I think the conclusions of some of the Bible teachers and scholars out there that I trust are probably pretty close, if not exactly right. The first rider appears on a white horse. An interesting parallel is that Christ will be riding a white horse when he returns as well. This apocalyptic rider is called Conquest, and he will be a conqueror, just as Yeshua will conquer his enemies. But this first rider is not Christ. There are some differences. Christ will be wearing a diadem crown, while this rider wears a Stephanos, which is a type of crown, but more like a wreath around the head. Something Olympians wore at the Olympics in Greece, or like the crown of thorns. A diadem is a crown of royalty, and only mentioned 3 times in the Bible. Jesus will be followed by the armies of heaven. His eyes will be like blazing fire, and on his robe and on his thigh he has King of Kings and Lord of Lords written. Stephanos were made from laurel trees, and this is interesting when considering the story of Daphne and Apollo. He had an insatiable love for Daphne, and she wanted nothing to do with him, so she begged her father, the river god, to hide her. Her father turned her into a laurel tree, and Apollo made the first laurel crown from the Daphne tree and wore it. This apocalyptical rider carries just a bow with a quiver of arrows on his back, most likely filled with poison or disease. The Greek word for bow here is toxon, that's Toxon, and this is the only place where this appears in the Bible. Obviously, this word is the root for toxic. This weapon is bow poison. Christ will carry a sword, so this is another difference. Some scholars believe this rider will be Apollo, as he was known to the Romans and the Greeks. He did more than hitch up the sun to a chariot and ride it across the sky. He was feared because he was a warrior and god of plagues. The Canaanites knew him as Resheph. Resheph was one of the most popular gods in that region for several thousands of years. He was an archer and a warrior, and the personal god of Amenhotep II. And the ironic thing about this is that this was the pharaoh who had to let God's people go because of the plagues sent on the Egyptians. Resheph the plague god had nothing on Yahweh's plagues. The Babylonian equivalent was Nergal. Nergal was a fierce warrior and an agent of chaos. Nergal was also called Era, and the Epic of Era was very popular in the ancient world. In this story, Nergal nearly wiped out humanity with a plague. Clearly, this rider on the white horse is a poor imitation of Yeshua, riding the same color horse on which he will come. An interesting side note here is that Cuth was one of the most important cities of the Babylonian Empire and was situated to the northeast of Babylon. The city was also spelled like Cuthah, Cthulhu, which is pretty darn close to Cthulhu. In 2 Kings 17, verse 30, we're told that the men of Cuth worshipped Nergal, our possible first horseman here. Lovecraft claimed that he derived the name Cthulhu from the Greek word chthonic, which means belonging to or inhabiting the underworld. Well, guess what? Nergal was the gatekeeper of the underworld. I would venture to guess that Lovecraft's inspiration was from a fallen angel source and reflects back on this time in 2 Kings and projects forward to this time of the end. Nergal was also an archer, and our rider carries a bow as his weapon. Pestilence is also associated with the first rider, and Resheph was the Canaanite plague god, so I think Apollo is a pretty accurate guess as to the identity of the first rider. And I know, as we've discussed before, there's so many of these names of gods, it's hard to keep track. Just know they're all one entity being called by a different name depending upon whatever culture we're talking about. The second rider rides on a red horse and is known as War. It seems to be a no-brainer to assume that this rider is Ares, as he was known to the Greeks. The Romans knew him as Mars. And an interesting parallel there is the red planet has been named Mars. The Moabites called him Chemosh, and Sumar called him Athtar. There's a female aspect to this rider also known as Venus to the Romans, Aphrodite to the Greeks, Ishtar to the Egyptians, and Inanna to the Sumerians. Many just think of Aphrodite and Venus being connected to love, but they were war gods too. One thing to keep in mind when talking about entities like this is that gender is our thing. These are the original non-binaries. There really is no gender with these entities, so this rider could appear as male or female. This is a violent entity that has come to only slaughter. Chemosh was the national god of Moab, and although that seems important, he is mentioned only 8 times in the Bible, so doesn't seem very important. But Moab was one of the most powerful kingdoms of its time, and Chemosh was one of 6 deities for whom a month was named. That put him alongside Ishtar and Dagon. He faded away during the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, but probably reemerged as Ares, as the ancient capital of Moab was named Areopolis. So even though he's not mentioned a lot of times by Chemosh in the Bible, it's very important. The third rider appears on a black horse and is bringing famine. The Greeks knew this entity as Hermes, the Romans as Mercury, the Egyptians as Thoth, the Norse as Odin, and the Mesopotamians as Nabu. Nabu was the son of Marduk, and a scribe who was the god of writing, wisdom, and kept the accounts of credit and debt. This writer carries scales to measure out how much food people will get, and the balance is a day's wages for a day's food, meaning not enough to share. Everyone works for what they will eat. This will undoubtedly lead to famine, and we know that this writer is specifically told to focus on bread and to leave wine and oil alone. We need bread to survive. Oil and wine aren't required for life. The word translated as scales in Revelation 6 is zugos, like a yoke that is placed across oxen. This is servitude. Debt is a form of slavery, and America is under trillions of it, with most households carrying thousands of dollars in debt. In the Bible, there was debt forgiveness after 7 years, and definitely during a Jubilee year, which came every 50 years. But that has ended, and easy credit has enslaved millions. And there is no doubt that a one-world system of finance is already at play behind the scenes. The ancient empire of Uruk demonstrates what is coming for the future tribulation. These crude bevel-rimmed bowls were found by archaeologists in the ruins of Uruk, and it wasn't just a few bowls. They found hundreds, probably thousands, of these cheap, ugly, and durable bowls that are just perfect for cupping in two hands. They were tossed away like garbage after a worker had eaten their daily portion of rations. The history of Uruk demonstrates what happens when a form of urbanism takes root. People leave their rural farms and come to the city where they need to be fed. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Independent scholar Jack Chang out of Boston wrote a paper on bevel-rimmed bowls. In it he writes, the first written texts recorded payments to individuals, payments that were probably given in BRBs, these bevel-rimmed bowls. And the bowls tell us as much about the system as the receipts. BRBs are a way to introduce students to the most basic kind of field archaeology, based on identifying common pottery types, not simply reviewing the occasional gold treasure or masterpiece. I introduce the bowls at the beginning of each course for chronological reasons, but also for pedagogical reasons. By beginning with the lowly BRB, students understand that history is written in common artifacts. More importantly, they find that they can ask and answer questions about the past with even limited information. And one of the questions he says can be asked is, why were these bowls made, and why are they all the same size? He answers, scholars believe that these bowls were made as measured containers with which workers could be paid in grain. With the advent of urbanism, work became specialized, refining metal tools, for example, and workers could not spend their time growing food to feed their families. Coinage had not yet been invented, so whatever institution they worked for, perhaps a palace led by a king or a temple led by a priest, they paid the specialized workers in a form they could use or store. One could argue that barley was a form of money. This clearly seems in line with the Bible telling us of the black rider, a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine. Those were a day's wages. We get mercantile, merchandise, and merchant from Mercury. And it's interesting to note that MasterCard introduced in 2009 the network access and brand usage fee that merchants pay when you use a credit card. Take the first letters of those words and you get N-A-B-U, Naboo. Think that whoever is running the puppet strings behind the scenes doesn't already know this stuff? What are the chances that MasterCard comes up with something that makes the acronym Nabu, who was the god of accounting? Ration food and debt means servitude to a central authority. Accountants, bankers, and lawyers seem to rule the world today, and Nabu was the god of accounts, contracts, scribes, and the like. There seems to be little doubt that a writer coming to bring famine and economic slavery to the world and using scales to implement this plan could be none other than Nabu. The fourth rider arrives on a pale horse, the color of illness, and is not only bringing death to people, but is followed by Hades. This entity is thought to be Thanatos, who was the personification of death to the Greeks. It makes sense that Hades would be following along because he is the god of the dead. The Roman counterpart is Muse, and the Canaanites called this entity Mot. The twin of this god was Hypnos, the god of sleep. Interesting considering that death is sometimes described as being asleep. Thanatos is a psychopomp, which is an entity that guides souls to their final place. When this rider comes with Hades, they both are given authority over a fourth of the earth, which probably means they kill a fourth of the population. But it does say earth, not people. Could this be a fourth of the livable area of the earth? Could they be destroying a lot of land? If it is talking about humans and animals, that's a lot of lives. And they accomplish this with sword and with famine and with pestilence. Wait a minute. That's the other three riders. So this fourth rider will use the other three riders to meet his goal. They all come together. That is when we will know that they are really here. We've had some nasty times in the past, but not all the riders were together. This will be like a hellish reunion. There have been diseases, viruses, plagues, and such with us from the dawn of time. The recent COVID-19 pandemic gave us all a window into how a virus could not only be used to kill people, but control them. People easily gave up every ounce of freedom when beat down with fear. If this wasn't a precursor to what the Pale Rider is bringing, I don't know what is. The Bible tells us the weapons carried by Thanatos include the sword, hunger, death, and beasts. The sword indicates military action, so probably war. Hunger is self-explanatory, but let me point out that in the Greek the word is limos, which means starvation. Limos was the goddess of starvation, and she was not pretty. Limos is described in Ovid Metamorphosis as being found, quote, in a stubborn stony field, grubbing with nails and teeth the scanty weeds. Her hair was coarse, her face sallow, her eyes sunken, her lips crusted and white, her throat scaly with scurf. Her parchment skin revealed the bowels within. Beneath her hollow loins jutted her withered hips. Her sagging breasts seemed hardly fastened to her ribs, her stomach only a void. Her joints wasted and huge, her knees like balls, her ankles grossly swollen. Death seems self-explanatory too, but remember that this is death riding, so why the redundancy? If death is riding, how is death also bringing death? Could these be a living kind of death? The Bible does tell us that people will pray for death and it will not come to them. Could this be some kind of zombie thing? Or perhaps a spiritual death? Beast is therion in the Greek and means little beasts of the earth. Is this actual beasts like animals or something like a virus? It seems almost as though it would be something more like a virus. There is no doubt that when the Pale Rider appears, the earth is going to be in a world of hurt. People wonder exactly when these riders will begin their rides. Could they have already started a very long ride? Let's look at Revelation 5, where we are told who it is that is opening this scroll that has 7 seals. It reads in verses 1 through 7. Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. And one of the elders said to me, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. This sounds like Jesus making his appearance right after the crucifixion. I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain. Is it possible that the riders began their ride in the 1st century AD? Studying and interpreting prophecy can be frustrating, and clearly there's no consensus on what much of the symbolism and prophetic words in Revelation and other books of the Bible are referring to. But it makes sense that the messages would not be clear. If we understood all of this, then so would the enemies of God and the fallen ones. We don't want them to be prepared completely for what will happen. Our main job is to be watchful and ready. The world around us seems ripe with each of the curses these riders represent rearing their heads in our modern era. It would seem the riders started their ride a long time ago, but they are just about to the finish line, and I fear it is very, very close to our time right now. But keep in mind that each of the riders is told to come on Yahweh's command, so he is in control of all of this. Do you hear the approaching hoofbeats of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? The ghost in you knows. Thank you for joining me on this episode. May God bless you and keep you. This has been a production of History Goes Bump.